I don't know about you, but I think it's time for a little bit of extra credit.
Today we're going to be taking apart a Fighter Subclass.
This is Home Brew Help.
Welcome to Home Brew Help. I'm Tony, this is Sean, and today we've got a little bit of extra credit for you guys.
Yeah, so we're not going to be talking about, further into our other series, but today we're going to be breaking apart a subclass fighter, why we would do certain things with the subclass, and how you can actually make one of your own.
Right, and it kind of starts with actually figuring out what the fighter is supposed to do, and we've kind of gone over that in our previous two videos and all that, but what is a fighter?
Well, a fighter is kind of basic when you kind of think about it. It's essentially really going to do a couple really good things. It's going to have the most ability score improvements and or feats out of any of the other classes.
Right.
It's going to have the most access to weapons and armor. It's going to have the most attacks. So really, it's kind of really honing in on doing what it does really, really well.
You got to think about it this way, right? The best thing about a fighter is that he doesn't have to choose whether he's going to take that ability score improvement or that feat, because he gets so many in there.
There's a good chance he's going to get both of them.
You know, it's never that toss up of like, well, I need to improve my spell save DC, right? Because he can do both.
Yeah, and what it really comes down to is this fighter is going to be a combat specialist. Now, the type of combat is basically what the subclass is going to be guiding it to. But essentially, when you're kind of creating a fighter subclass, you have to consider whether you're going to stick with kind of the core mechanics of the fighter class, or if you're going to take that and flavor it in a different way.
Right. Great example of that is like the Arcane Archer with it, right?
Yeah.
He, is not necessarily in the fray like a normal fighter would be, but they take the mechanic of doing that damage. He still gets all those attacks. He still gets all those things, but now he's doing them from a distance with magic arrows.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
As opposed to like the champion, which we'll bring up later because a lot of people think he sucks and he doesn't.
A misleadingly fun subclass, actually.
That's right. But it's all about, am I going to stick to the fact that I have all these extra attacks and all these weapons and things that I can do, like the champion or the battlemaster,
right? Or
am I going to flavor it up and use that to make those things better?
Yes, exactly. Now, when we actually get to the really gritty stuff about making the subclass, whether it's level 2, level 3, depending on the class, typically that first thing, and for the fighter it's going to be level 3 when you first pick the subclass, is kind of that defining feature for that subclass.
Right. And it's different for each different class out there of what levels they get stuff at, but you always want to keep to 3, 7, 10, 15, 18 with a fighter.
Yeah, and that's kind of the base structure that you're going to go with. Now, going back to this first third level ability, it is very, very crucial as it's kind of going to be setting up the rest of the progression for this subclass. Ideally, you really want to capture what this subclass can do and what it's really good at this third level. And for a fighter, that's, no exception. Right.
This is your defining ability, right? This is the Arcane Archer being able to shoot magic arrows.
Yeah.
This is the Cavalier being able to ride a horse and protect people.
Yeah, exactly.
Every single one has that specific thing, like Eldritch Knight gets his spell casting at that ability.
Yeah, exactly. Now, hopefully, once you've actually kind of captured this, 7th level is things can kind of get a little mixed up here. Right.
And it depends on two things. If you defined your ability at 3rd level, right, then this one's normally a fluff kind of thing.
Yeah, potentially, yes.
Yeah. But it always has to be something that kind of works with the class.
Yeah, and you might actually see this pattern kind of go throughout some of the other subclasses that currently exist in D&D. But again, the thing that you want to remember is that the fighter is kind of that combat specialist. So this level 3 ability and or this level 7 ability is going to really show how they shine in a combat encounter.
Right. And if it is a fluff ability, like if you've already defined it at 3rd level and what have you, it should meet your theme. It should definitely, the 7th level ability, whether it be a fluff thing, like for example, with the Cavalier being able to get on a horse with 5 feet of movement instead of, half his movement. It doesn't really affect so much in combat or anything like that. It's more a social interaction. People refer to these as ribbon abilities as well.
Yeah, and I actually, it's funny because when I was first going through like the samurai class, they actually get an ability where they just get proficiency in persuasion checks, which at first I didn't really, I was like, why do they do that? But if you kind of look into the lore of the samurai, it makes sense to the theme, again, going back to that first theme. And again, at level 3, they already get like the resistance and everything. So they've already got like, the samurai's already kind of really established here. That level 7 ability, we'll just add something that kind of goes to their story.
Right. And that's different from 10, 15, 18. Because 10, 15, 18, you're building on the stuff that they already have to actually make them better and make them survive later in the game.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting when you look at the 10, 15, 18 abilities. Unlike some of the other classes where it's like, oh, every sorcerer gets this at 14 or every barbarian gets this at 14. It's kind of an open book when it comes to those 10, 15, and 18 abilities because you're kind of going back and looking at what you want this class to do and then basically just like improving on that. So there's not really like a hard guide as to what kind of abilities you have to give at these certain capstones.
Right. They usually have something to do with combat and they usually go back to whatever that theme is.
Yeah.
But they are stuff that you're building on it. So it may be an improvement to the thing he got at 3rd level. It may be, more survivability so he can do the things that he did at 3rd and 7th level more.
Yeah, and if it's not an improvement to an existing ability, sometimes it's a brand new ability that buffs those other existing abilities too.
It all kind of works up and flows. So just to recap on that, 3rd is your defining trait.
Right.
7, if you haven't defined your trait, you define it by putting an ability that actually gives them the mechanic or whatever you're doing. Or you put in some proficiency bonus or some fluff that's there. Yeah. And then your last 3, your 10, 15, 18 are all about bulking up what you already have.
Yeah, precisely. Now, when you're kind of going through the class, obviously we always talk about playtesting, but you do want to make sure that all these abilities, for the most part, are actually going to kind of work together well in an actual combat encounter. And you'll be surprised as you kind of like, oh, I think this is a really cool combat thing. I want my fighter to do this. The problem that you'll constantly run into is that this fighter ability does not really flow well with the rest of this combat,
Right. Like if all of a sudden at 10th level, all of a sudden he's really good with shooting bows and he's never touched a bow before in his life. It just doesn't flow well. Right. Yeah. So that's where that theme that we talked about in episode 1 of this and lesson 1 of this, you have to carry that through. It's super important.
Now you wanted to bring up a bit of a, I guess, maybe nowadays underused subclass, except for some of our maybe a new player.
For every person that makes a human fighter out there, they're all cringing right now. I want to bring up the champion.
Yeah,
because
it's been there since the beginning.
It has, and I have overlooked it so many times and thought, my God, this is boring. How could this be something cool? Right. But what I found when we were looking at it, remember how we talked about going back to that original phrase, whatever is that defining thing. This is international symbol for defining
this right here.
This right here, right? If you read that, you actually find out that they are honing their bodies to make them physically perfect and be deadly with their strikes.
When we think about someone who wants to be a champion, they're trying to be the best that they can possibly be. They're trying to be perfect, and they're going to do whatever it takes to kind of do what it is that they're doing. In the case of a fighter, it's dealing damage, it's getting attacks in, and it's making sure that it can keep surviving so it can keep doing attacks.
Right. So remember how we said at the 3rd level ability, you either want to stick with the base mechanic of the fighter or you want to flavor it. This didn't put any flavor. This is vanilla.
Yeah,
this is
pretty much. Vanilla. I mean, 3rd level is just the good crit.
Right, exactly. So you get that improved critical. But if you think about it, if his job is just to do as much damage as he possibly can, then improved critical, moving it from a 5 to a 10%, and now having that second attack that comes up next.
Yeah.
You're not only doing, I can crit on 19 or 20, you're critting on 19 or 20 twice per round.
Yes, exactly. And I know our min-maxers are probably ogling at the numbers, but yeah, essentially that 3rd, and it's so simple of a skill, but that 3rd level ability is literally just making the percentage of getting a crit higher. And then 7th level is a very interesting one because it's
fluffy.
Yeah, it's a little fluffy, but also not really because you're adding half your proficiency bonus to any strength, dex, or con check, and then you get to do the better long jump. Again, going to the fact that you want to keep staying in the fight and you want to get in there and you want to make sure that you're still doing attacks.
Right, exactly. If you're in the fray with that, you're going to be making straight checks for grapples. You're going to be making, the dexterity checks. You're going to be making the constitution checks because you're getting hit, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So you've got those things happening. And then just that added oomph of being able to jump over the party and just jump into the fray is actually really, really cool. So it goes with Remarkable Athlete. 10th level, you get an additional fighting style. Now, whoop-de-doo, an additional fighting style, right?
Right, and it seems like a bit of a weird choice, but when you think about it, this fighter is now able to adapt to a different situation. If it feels like, oh, I really shouldn't be using my shield right now, I'm going to take out this one-handed weapon.
Right.
It's not because it's trying to master or do something different. It's just trying to stay in the fight. That way, can you keep doing those attacks?
Right, exactly. Like maybe you want to switch to a defensive and get that extra 1 point of AC. Mm-hmm. Maybe you've been hit so many times by the monster that's there that you really want to protect yourself a little bit more, but don't want to stop your damage.
Yes.
Switch to defensive, right? And then, there's other things that they end up getting with that. That's superior critical. Now it's 18 to 20.
50% chance, which is great.
Which, if you look again, it's building upon what they already had, 18 to 20. And then you become a survivor at 18th.
Right. So essentially, you're getting hit points at the beginning of every single turn whenever you're under your half of your maximum. So again,
it keeps you there doing those 4 attacks per round at a 15% critical.
Yeah, so, when we looked at this, I realized that the champion is not just somebody who's trying to crit a little bit more. There's somebody who is trying to not die and do their job very, very well.
Right. And our goal is to have you guys make subclasses that do exactly that.
Yes, precisely.
So in our third video, we're going to be going over how to actually make a mechanic, right?
Yeah, so we're actually going to be going into actually starting to think about the different mechanics that you're going to be picking at those different parts of that subclass. It's going to be a very heavy video, so be sure to grab a drink, grab some snacks. It'll be a bit of a long one, but we bet that it's going to be a good one. So
that's right. And remember, the best campaigns and the best subclasses are always the ones that you homebrew. So until next time,
keep brewing.